I mix what I like, 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 what I Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like. I Mix What I Like.org at I Mix What I Like for all your relevant social media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to play host. And before we get started, another shameless plug for the fact that Paul Grave has made my new book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, available for free as a tribute to this moment of Black Lives Matter uprise and protest. So all of that can be gotten and reached at imixwhatilike.org. So please go grab the book for free, check it out, and let's wrap. On to the matter of business at hand. More importantly, my man Dayvon Love is back again. He, of course, is the Director of Public Policy for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle in Baltimore, Maryland, and is back with us again to talk about a new piece he's been working on, what I've, in fun and love, referred to in my own looking at it as the politics of Karen. But Dayvon, let's talk about what you've been working on and how you would prefer to title it, perhaps, and what you're looking to have us all address in that work.
Yeah. So the piece is right now it's going to be titled "The Colonization of Radical Politics," and really the point of it is, as a person who has done political advocacy, organized, and the like, I feel like I haven't seen enough specific conversation about the role that white organizations, philanthropy, kind of institutionalized aspects of the left. I haven't seen enough written that discusses the political economy of how organizing, actually happens. And so a part of what I've observed is that white folks in their institutions play a big role in curating the kinds of discourses that get described as radical. They curate the political organizations that are branded as radical in the, political and public mainstream. And, and a part of what I conclude is that the result of that is that then the kinds of Black political organizing that gets most lifted up in the mainstream is examples of, Black folks that can, talk, very radical, who do things that may be understood to be generally disruptive, but don't have the ability to actually confront like white corporate political power. Like the folks that get elevated don't actually have the ability to shift the allocation of resources in any substantial way or move policy or anything of that sort. And so yeah, that was really,
Well, I was looking at the piece. The first thing I thought again was, wow, here we go again. We have to have yet another Black radical critique of the white left and or what purports to be a white left. And there's a precedent for this. There's a long history. Famously Malcolm X saying John Brown is the standard for the white ally, right. or Assata Shakur has been critical of the white left. I mean, Dr. King had a very direct and aggressive, hostile critique of the white left and the Black bourgeoisie, but the white left. Kwame Ture said that and this is what I also specifically was saying about. Used to talk about how the white left that encounters the Black radical struggle is really the segment of the white population that feels powerless to confront its own community in making advance. So as a sort of cop-out, they look to engage Black radical elements as an ally or a supportive element, but in reality, they are the weakest section of the white community in many regards. And then lastly, I'm thinking specifically in my joke about Karen is in this particular moment, obviously, with all the references to that, is that you do specifically look at the role of in the case of one particular woman, but I think in general, the role of white women in this struggle? Maybe my own, I'm projecting in a focus here that you don't intend, but to me, I thought it was important because historically white women have often been given a pass in terms of their complicitness in enslavement or Jim and Jane Crow or Black oppression in general, while claiming sort of, particularly in long lines of intersectionality and feminism, some sort of a natural alignment with Black struggle. So I'm just thinking of all of that as I'm looking at your piece in terms of precedent and in terms of the moment now, and wondering if any of that played or plays a role or a factor, if I'm getting that correct in what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely plays a role. So a couple of things. One is that one of the things that LBS is focused on in Baltimore is the nonprofit industrial complex. And the reason that we focus on that is because in Maryland and in Baltimore, with the exception of a two-term Republican governor, the first in 50 years, it's a Democratic Party stronghold, right? Which means we're dealing with liberals. We're not dealing with the evil, Republicans, and so then the question becomes, well, then why is the Black community in the condition that it's in, right? In Maryland, where there was a study that came out at some point last year that said that Maryland's prison population, its percentage, had the highest percentage of Black people in its prison population than Mississippi, right? The highest in the country. So this is a bunch of questions. And what we recognize is that it is the nonprofit sector, which is heavily controlled and heavily influenced by white women, right? And so a big part of what happens, and I've seen it particularly in youth serving organizations. So you have this designation called youth-led. And what it really has come to mean is a group of young people who some white adult, more than likely a woman, will buy them pizza, maybe take them out to a restaurant sometimes, give them a platform so that they feel special. And, but the young people don't actually get any real training, no real political education, none of that. And so what ends up happening is that, the youth, their socialization being controlled by these white women. It creates a context where they're essentially socializing these Black youth to a vision of Black liberation that requires their existence, that requires the existence of these white women. And a lot of times these white women hold very, racist caricatures in their mind of who Black people are. And so typically they then get the kinds of Black folks who, and this is just in my estimation, this is part of what I put in the piece, the kinds of Black folks that have experienced alienation from Black people, right? As a part of, how they use certain Black people to represent a version of Black politics that, again, is more about, it is more cosmetic, it's more superficial, less about confronting power. And so, white women have played a big role, and their role is understated, I think, in the general commentary about radical politics. And I think that's on purpose. And again, there's a political economy to it. These are, if you think about like gender and women's studies programs, and stuff like that, philanthropy, big parts of the public sector. They have a lot of influence over, who gets tenure and who gets funded, and they have huge power over that. And so it's my sense that that's why this part of the conversation doesn't get talked about.
Now, again, I may be projecting here, but as I read the piece, I'm thinking about the work you all are engaged in, and as nationalists and Pan-Africanists, but with an understanding that to achieve certain degrees of power, sovereignty, balance, there has to be engagement and even allied working with other communities that to engage the electoral political process, maybe to engage broader apparatuses of public policy or whatever. There has to be some working relationship. So, because I was thinking initially as I started reading it, when you sent it to me, I was thinking, not only here we go again, but why do you feel it necessary to have to write out this explanation largely? I know your audience is Black, but this is also feeling to me like this, you're intending white potential allies or partners to read this and but why is that? Why do you still feel that that's necessary? And then even to the extent that you encourage certain patterns of behavior that, something we talked about offline, I want to ask you about again, engaging places in Baltimore like Everyone's Place, Black cultural warehouses, maybe we can come back and talk specifically about that the importance of that store and why you bring it up. But shout out to Brother Nati, of course. But why are you again writing this piece ostensibly or to white people? What is the point here?
So a part of when I think of like who I'm writing to folks who seem to be engaged in what they think is radical politics, or people observing folks who they believe to be engaging in radical politics as a way for discussion to be had about what is the most effective forms of political organization. And the reason for that is because I think there are people who, there are lots of folks that would agree with the perspective that we lay out in the piece, but don't have the language to explain, what it is that they're seeing. So, there's some people that may say, oh, okay, I see, so-and-so Black activists. But when I go to their events, there's a lot of like smelly white people at their events, and so so it's weird to me, like what's going on here?
The patchouli and the all of that stuff. So,
yeah. And so for me, it's about, and it's not a coincidence. It's not like, the folks who are observing in that pattern I just happen to be falling into that, right? There's certain, political, social, and financial benefits to organizing in such a way where that's a substantial part of your base. And this isn't to say that, and I say this in the piece, this isn't to say you don't engage white people at all, right? Or you don't engage with their ideas, but what it says is that, that it says something when an organization calls itself radical, calls itself super Black, when a large part of their base, is white. And then I guess the other thing I would say is that, a part of why I wrote it is because, as a person who takes really seriously the study of history, and kind of to your point about like, here we go again, my concern was that the kind of the self-congratulatory tone that I think many white folks are taking to increase involvement of white people in the demonstrations, in the midst of like the, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, like in the midst of that, the kind of self-congratulatory tone concerns me when paired with, again, in the mainstream, with not enough Black folks making what I think is the right critique or raising the appropriate concerns about what the increased involvement of white people in those protests may mean, right? The ones that I've seen, I think are the wrong one, or the wrong overstated concern, which is white folks who come to protest, be confrontational, create disruption, and burn, they're the one, like, to me, that critique is overstated. And I think could have the impact of justifying like aggressive military action against Black people, for whom some of us are engaged in stuff that goes beyond, peaceful, quote unquote, protests. So for me, this piece is what I think the conversation should be about, as the conversation is, as we have the conversation about the role of white people and what we should think about the apparent increase in interest in these kinds of issues.
Yeah, I mean, and sort of to your point, your message is sort of twofold, at least. You know, sort of if I'm summarizing here correctly, to your Black audience, you're saying, and this is where everyone's place, you know, which is today to this day still my favorite bookstore that I've ever been to in the world. It says you're saying that this does not mean, you say, to never associate with white people or institutions or interact with their ideas, but it means to have a rigorous immersion in bodies of work that are not popular in mainstream spaces. If you are in Baltimore, it means you go to spaces like Everyone's Place bookstore and build your intellectual war chest there. And then sort of a couple paragraphs later to conclude, at least in the version I'm looking at here, to white people, you're saying the true test of their actual commitment to Black liberation is the extent to which they will organize on a consistent basis with other white people against racism, against the racism of their own people. And this kind of goes back to that point that Teray was making so many years ago, that the whites who engage Black radical struggle or Black struggles at all are often those who feel powerless to engage their own communities, and then want to look to engage and even encourage Black people to do what they wouldn't encourage their own communities to do. Anyway, so if there's anything I'm missing, please flesh that out or correct it or add to what I'm saying here, because I think that, again, not only, as we've said here already, there's a pattern here, but there's a renewed importance, because in fact, as I'm looking at it, maybe it's even more important to revisit these concerns given the heightened public relations campaign that has come in response to the George Floyd protests, where you're seeing everyone from Amazon to Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan Chase, you know, taking knees. Yep. You got Nancy Pelosi sitting on $100 million of her own money, having just helped give away $5 trillion more to her, you know, corporate compatriots, taking a knee wearing kente cloth. Like, man, you know, where are all of these people looking to struggle going to go to get their, as you say, their intellectual war chest put together? It can't be from MSNBC, CNN, or some other mainstream outlet. Because anyway, but go ahead. Yeah. And see, and a part of, I wrote it at the risk of knowing that some people are going to read it and just kind of chalk it up to, you know, he's an asshole, you know, he's just mean, and, you know, doesn't like certain. And a part of why I say that is because I think sometimes what happens is people look at like revolutionary political activity as I think it's almost like a video game, right? Where it's like, I get to play. And, you know, again, being a person that takes seriously the study of history, you know, it's like the BLA wasn't playing. You know what I'm saying? Like the Mau Mau, they weren't playing. You know, and, you know, I don't publicly claim those politics. I claim them in terms of we need to study and respect it. But I don't claim those politics because I'm not engaged and haven't made the sacrifice that those kinds of entities made, you know, towards Black freedom and Black struggle. You know, so to me, it's like, it's out of respect that I make sure that I'm not overstating or misrepresenting the nature of my own, you know, politics. But I think that, you know, with the way in which in the mainstream, it's almost like a garment that you can take on and off. And I think the thing that is least understood, at least popularly understood, is the harm that does. So I think some people, they chalk it up to, well, that's just how they do their thing. You know, if that's their politics, then, you know, that's whatever, that's their politics. And for me, my point is like, actually, no, it impairs our ability
to really pursue politics that can actually make a material difference in the lives of Black people, right? And so that's the importance of the critique. And so the part of why I wrote it out as extensively is that, and I think I told you offline that even after going through it, like I added another 1,500 words for the purpose of like giving more explanation. And because I think it's just so important. And I actually want to give an example that, and it's not in the version you had. I added it, and I think you'll like this example. So I think sometimes when people think about Malcolm X, they say he's radical because, you know, his kind of verbal confrontations to white people, you know, and, you know, he's a firebrand, you know, fiery rhetoric, you know, white man's the devil, all that stuff. But I think the problem with that narration is that those things contribute to his radicalism, but the essential ingredient was the fact that he had a base that was a part of what he built as he established Nation of Islam mosques all over the country, and had a base that both was in the nation and outside the Nation of Islam, and that he was able to leverage that base to actually materially confront power in a way that I think is not emphasized enough. And so the example I give is that because he had a base, he was understood when he went to, you know, Africa, Western Asia, as almost like a dignitary, an ambassador of Black America. Having that base leveraged his ability to build those relationships with those African heads of state. And his influence over those African heads of state played a role in pushing the United States to change its policy in terms of segregation, right? Because America couldn't afford, in terms of its, you know, global imperial ambitions, it couldn't afford for its kind of moral legitimacy to be damaged in that way. And so Malcolm, using his base to go to African heads of state and be able to put pressure on the United States. And one of the best examples I actually found, A. Peter Bailey in his memoirs, the best example that I found is that he talks about a meeting in the UN where the Ghanaian ambassador says, because they were talking about intervention into the Congo, Western nations wanted to intervene in the Congo, US and Belgium. And the Ghanaian head of state says, well, if you intervene into the Congo, what's to say we should intervene on behalf of Black folks in the southern states of the United States because of the terrorism and torture that they experience? And Peter Bailey says that, he quotes the reporter saying that the Western ambassadors stood in stunned astonishment, and that the US ambassador did not take his responsibility to respond. Because so just thinking about, like, Malcolm was able to get an African ambassador to infer military action against the United States, right? To me, that's radical politics, right? But that's something you build, right? You build a base, you build the relationships, you do the kind of intellectual work, the political strategy, and you're actually able to confront the most powerful imperial, force in the world in a way that very few people can claim. Like, so for me, the point of the piece is to say, like, that's radical politics. Like, not again, at the risk of sounding like an ass, it's like not the stuff that is popular on social media, not the stuff that feels good to put out there. Like, that, it's cool, but that's not radical politics.
Well, this is, for me, one of the biggest the dilemmas of our moment, and again, why I think the work of LBS and what your argument here is so important is trying to remind people that there has to be something beyond the symbol. And I would personally like to see more discussion of policy that redistributes the wealth of this country beyond just people spray painting Black Lives Matter, taking knees. By the way, that Jamie Dimon thing is so fun. I mean, the graphic is amazing. This JP Morgan Chase dude whose wealth has literally been just taken from all of our collective labor is literally taking a knee in front of his bank vaults. So I just get, it's like, get off your knee and open up that vault. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm thinking. Like, but that's what I think is at least as I read it, or the version that I have so far, is how I read your critique here, that there has to be something substantive behind the symbolic overtures of any group, even from within the Black community, of solidarity. We have to be moving beyond, some signs and symbols. So as we wrap up, man, let me give you last word to offer up any concluding thoughts or remarks. Please also let us know when and where the full piece is going to be up, and we'll certainly link to it at imixwhatilike.org as soon as it's available.
Yeah, I would say that, I think one of the value of platforms like this is that, we actually get to have these kinds of conversations about what I think is the political economy of, Black radical activism. And, I think it's going to be even more important, as, time goes on, to really parse out that conversation. And I know for me, again, a part of why I wrote the piece is because, just general frustration at the way in which, radical causes on behalf of Black people are being absorbed into a set of white institutional formations that are looking to preserve power, but maintain the veneer of, radicalism and progressivism and justice. And even some of the most well-meaning of white folks are participating in something that I think is really damaging the ability for Black radical organization to have a real impact. And so the piece should come out probably, I think, so today's Friday, the 12th. So it should come out either today or Monday. Okay. And so there'll be some graphics that accompany, because it's, so it's a fairly long piece. So there'll be some graphics that accompany it. So, we hope your listeners, look at it, check it out, give feedback. And if, they like it, share it around. LBS
and we'll certainly come back and talk about some of the response and follow-up going forward as well, too. So Dayvon Love, Leaders of Beautiful Struggle, lbsbaltimore.com. Thank you again for joining us here at I Mix What I Like, and we appreciate your work, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.